Everyone. Welcome to my teaching learning session. We continue with BPCG-171 Unit 3, which is General Psychology. Today we are going to talk about core contents of General Psychology. This will give us an introduction about what psychology comprises of majorly. We are going to talk about cognitive processes. We are going to talk about attention. Also, we are going to talk about perception and learning memory thinking. So there's going to be a huge lot of things that we are going to talk about. Let's continue with the laws of Gestalt. We started with perception, so let me define you again when we speak about general psychology. What is perception? So speaking of perception, you need to know that the laws of organization, Gestalt principles, is based on this belief that Wertheimer stated that Gestalt mentioned Kafka and Kohler developed some set of rules. They mentioned that these rules are important to organize your perception, which is the form perception. Form perception is one of the first perception that happens to us, and also they call these rules to be Gestalt rules. Few of them we have discussed earlier, which was law of proximity, law of similarity to start with today. This is a law which says that similar things will appear together. They will look as if they're grouped together. So let's take an example. When we see a collection of toys, we might see the same color toys together and another color toys together in that chunk. Also, the laws of pragnance is sometimes referred to as the law of good figure. That is a tendency of human values to understand all the ambiguous stimuli as whole. Our ability to see a broken painting as a whole and still understand it, it's called as the law of pragnance. Pragnance is also referred to as good figure, which also talks about our human tendency to see everything is good figure, everything is complete. Speaking of that, let's take another law, which is law of proximity. Proximity states that anything which is seemingly together or seated together or is together, and not then anything which is spaced apart and farther away is seen as together. So let's take an example on the image that we have on the left, which talks about proximity. The three lines of dotted things seem as if they are together. It looks like a mat. It looks like the three dotted lines look like rails to us. So proximity is anything which is grouped together, looks as if they're forming an organized figure or a whole. Also, then we have the law of continuity. I feel the rivers, pathways, navigation, all functions on the law of continuity, which says the law holds that the point are connected by starting in the curving lines are seen to have a continuous pathway. Also, speaking ahead, when we go of law of continuity, we have law of closure. A very beautiful example of law of closure is already mentioned in the image over there. Anything which seems is grouped together and is not complete but is little separated, it is seen as a whole. So let's take an example. When we see a language which has wrong spellings, but still we are able to communicate, still we are able to read it well. At times when spellings are incorrect, content is incorrect, and still we are able to read it well. Remember, that is called the law of closure, which is we perceive elements as belonging to the same figure if they seem complete to some entity. Our brains actually ignore the contradictory information and they do not see the gaps, they fill the gaps. And the example is the diamond shaped figure, which, despite having breakage in between, still is perceived as the diamond shaped figure that we have. Also, the law of common region. Law of common region says that, Gestalt law of common region was says that when elements are located in the same region, we usually perceive them to be belonging to one another. And the circles on the right side actually is an example. The way they have clustered together, we see that circles have similarity. They're a part of the same, probably a content, same context. We also in the basis of similarity found out there are dots inside the circle, so that is called the law of common region. We try to find out commonalities in figures, in people, in situations. These law tends to be very important to us. Remember, creating a clear boundary, defined boundary, can can be overpowered other Gestalt laws such as law of proximity. So creating a clearly defined boundary overpowering any other feature content other than the Gestalt law of proximity is possible. So remember, when we speak of perception, perception is possible only when we are able to make a meaningful whole, and that meaningful whole is formed through laws of perceptual organization, which was Gestalt given by Gestalt psychologist. Gestalt was referred to as good figure. Let's start with another content today, which is a very crucial content. See, when we attend to information in psychology, how do we say that psychology is a study of human mind and behavior? It is a study of human mind and behavior because we are able to understand people's behavior by the way they sense information from the environment, the way they attend to it, and the way they perceive it. So, speaking of that, remember, learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior or any kind of activity which is done by human man or mankind or any animal resulting in a experience. So remember, learning will be relatively permanent. It will give a behavioral change, but it has to be backed by an experience, which means we need to be involved in it. Until we are not involved, remember, the behavioral change will not be visible. Some characteristic, learning is relatively permanent. We need to know that it's not a temporary change. It will bring, because it has an experience, it will bring about a behavioral change. Anything that you are learning, if does not bring about a change in you, remember that's not something which we can say as learning. Also, remember, permanent change due to aging or maturation is not considered as learning. So, as you grow as an individual, as you grow, as you mature in terms of numbers of age, remember that change is not considered as learning. Another third thing, experience does not mean our own experiences only. Experiences also mean the experiences which you see other people having and that has an impact on you. So learning can occur through various processes. It can happen through observation, vicarious, and conditioning also. So there are three theories that we come across when we talk about learning, which is conditioning ideally. The learning association, learning by consequence, learning by watching others. So a few different kinds of learning. Learning by association is known as classical conditioning. Learning by consequences is known as instrumental conditioning. Learning by watching others is called observational conditioning. Let's understand what's the difference between learning and conditioning. Do we differentiate between the two? Yes, we do. Conditioning is a kind of training that we provide to people. And I feel conditioning is also very mechanical to human mankind. Learning is having an experience, conditioning is having a training. So it's like an a plus b plus is equal to c, or a plus b square is equal to a square plus b square plus 2abc. So that's like a pattern of formula which is made learn. It is a thorough training which is given to you with what kind of questions this kind of formula will be given. Remember, learning does not happen like that. Learning, on the other end, is having an experience, having a behavioral change. So, learning is an umbrella term under which these conditioning falls, which is learning by association, is called classical conditioning. Why it's called learning by association, we will understand this in the next slide. So, starting with learning with association. So, classical conditioning was given by a very well known psychologist, Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov was a physiologist and he came with a conditioning called classical conditioning. Called classical because it's one of the first conditioning which was ever given. So, first as a kind, so it was labeled as classical. Here we say we need to get back to basics. We need to understand what is behavior. See, behavior is a response to a stimuli. Any change that you happen to have. So, what is a stimuli? Anything can be a stimuli. A water bottle can be a stimuli. A mobile phone can be a stimuli if it triggers a response. So, any stimuli that can give out response results to behavior. So, remember, stimulus response is the essence and the functioning of behaviors. So, speaking of that, remember, when we speak about classical conditioning spoke about one stimulus getting associated to another stimulus that can trigger a response. So it is SSR association. Now, this was done by Ivan Pavlov. As I said, he was a Russian physiologist. He started doing this experiment when he started noticing his own dog. He had pets and he found that his dog used to always salivate when he saw the meat powder, which was the food. And I think this is a very common instance that we also see around our pets. Haven't we seen with cats and animals? As soon as we move their food box, or as soon as uh, we tend to move in terms of speaking of food box, when we move them, their food box from here to there, they go so excited. They feel that the food is coming. Their palate, their taste buds gets triggered. So remember, food is a stimuli which is evoking a response. But remember, food cannot be trained because it is an appetitive thing. We all feel that mouth watering whenever we see the food. So the food was paired with the bell, so that The association is between the bell and the food, and naturally the dog is salivating. So that is called the SSR association. So speaking of an SSR association, bell was rang, the food was given, the dog salivated. The bell was rang, the food was given, the dog salivated. So that's something which was classical conditioning. Remember, the bell was considered as a neutral stimuli, and we conditioned our learning through the bell. So neutral stimuli must occur immediately before the naturally occurring stimuli, which was the food. Remember, the food is a very automatic thing. It is naturally occurring behavior which is giving rise to salivation. This is something which is a diagram that can support us the entire classical conditioning and the functioning of it. So let's go on and understand this when we speak about classical conditioning. So classical conditioning comprises of before conditioning circumstances. So before conditioning, what happened? Ivan Pavlov made an enclosure, fixated his dog within it. He gave the food and the dog salivated. At the moment, the food is the unconditioned stimuli. We cannot train the food because the food is a naturally occurring stimuli. So in the Pavlovian conditioning, before being conditioned anything, before we put out a neutral stimuli, the food is given to check that is it giving a response. We understood the unconditioned stimuli is food and unconditioned response is salivation because the food will give responses. It's an automatic thing. Then going ahead, we understood we need to train, we need to associate and bring about a neutral stimuli. Neutral stimuli is something which does not trigger response, which we found out. Look at the image. Before conditioning, the bell was rang, the whistle was blown, no response. No salivation, nothing, no response came in. So third is now we are conditioning, we are associating. We associate the neutral stimuli, the food, salivation occurs. This goes on for a number of days. The bell, the food, the salivation, the bell, the food, the salivation. So now we understood to test the conditioning that did the dog get any kind of conditioning from the bell. What do? We blow the whistle, do not give the food, but we get to know that the dog is salivating. That means now the bell has become the conditioned stimuli. So once held at the neutral stimuli, which did not trigger a response. But if you pair it with food, it got conditioned that when the bell is rang, the food will be coming and the dog in the expectation salivates. So the salivation becomes the conditioned response, a learned response that has happened, which is created, which is not existing before. So very beautiful experiment. Have a look on the image. It is something that I feel in the day-to-day living, this kind of conditioning of association is not very common, but not rare. We might have this kind of conditioning taking place in school. While we ring the bell and associate that the period is over, children feel the sense of freedom of getting up and going out of the class. Now, let's understand learning through a consequence, which is learning through a reward and reinforcement. This was operant or instrumental conditioning. This is a type of associative kind of learning which involves weakening or strengthening of the behavior by using something which is coming after the behavior. So it could be a reward, it could be a punishment, it could be anything. So operant conditioning was given by B.F. Skinner. He made an experiment in his Skinner box. It is also called instrumental conditioning. Skinner believed that the classical conditioning does not really account for all types of learning. So, especially in academic with children, to make them learn, consequences was greatly important. That is, anything that comes after the behavior is greatly important. Speaking of that, when we state that we need to have something after the behavior, that leads to maximum amount of learning with children. So, simple examples of life. We want a child to do really well in any subject. We tell them we'll give you a candy. After that, you perform well, so you get a candy. So you realize we are expecting the child to do well by a reward which will come after the behavior. So that's something which is a reinforcement. What is a reinforcement? Reinforcement is something which, it is a contingency that allows the increasing of the desired behavior. So it will allow that the desired behavior occurs again and again. So consequences must be quickly follow the behavior. Remember, if you said that you will give them a candy, the candy should come within few hours. It should not come after 10 days, 5 days. It will lose its value. So remember, classical conditioning was involuntary behavior because I feel salivation, mouth watering is an automatic thing. This is a voluntary behavior. So imagine if a child really does not like literature or does not like maths and logic, and you've told them, I'll get you your favorite toy after you perform really well in maths. And the child says, I don't like maths. I probably will not perform well. So this is the voluntary behaviors being trained. Your reward and punishment depends upon if the desired behavior is under your control. You really like it, you want to do it or not. So that is something that we speak about as operant conditioning. Let's look at the Skinner box that he created. B.F. Skinner created a Skinner box where the rat was there. A hungry rat was sent, and there was a signal light and a lever. And the rat could pull down the lever, and in the pallet, the food pellets fell. So it's your response. It's a response which will follow a reward. You put down the pellet while press down the lever, the food will fall down, and you have it. So this was the B.F. Skinner concept of classical conditioning, telling us that anything which is followed by the response leads to conditioning, which is called the instrumental conditioning. Also, it depends upon the kind of after effect that you're giving. Are you giving a reward? Are you giving a punishment? It depends upon that. If you give a punishment, remember the behavior is going to be stopped. So it needs to be the undesirable behavior. And if it's a reward, it will increase the likelihood. So that is increasing. Reward and punishment is used to increase or decrease the likelihood of the behavior to happen in future or not happen in future. Remember, Skinner identified two key aspects of operant conditioning, which was reward and punishment. Reward serves to increase the behavior, punishment serves to decrease the behavior. There are different kinds of reinforcement that we have. The first reinforcement is the positive, then is negative. We have a lot of confusion between the negative and the punishment, so let's read about it. What is positive reinforcement? Simple. Involving a favorable outcome after the favorable outcome after the response. If you need a desirable response, treat the child. Tell them you clean the room, you get your favorite food. So cleaning the room and favorite food, simple positive reinforcement. Negative is about removal of an unpleasant stimuli, like telling a child if she eats all potatoes, she won't get to eat the broccoli. So if you want a child to finish his or her meal, you tell them, fine, you can eat the French beans, don't eat the broccoli. I will exclude you from the broccoli. So to get rid of the broccoli, the child will eat the French beans and potatoes. So did you see that? To to avoid, to escape, to remove the unpleasant stimuli, the child does a behavior which is at least eating the entire meal that he or she is served. So that is removal of an unpleasant stimuli, and eating your meal. Eating your meal is the response that you want, and what do you do for that? You tell them, fine, you leave the unpleasant thing and you complete the meal without it. Also, at times, children find their mothers shouting, scolding them, telling them so many things to do. So next time, before their mother starts shouting, the child cleans the room. So we understand how simple. We want to avoid the the scolding, the screeching of the mother, or and the a bad impression on her. To avoid that unpleasant stimuli, what do? We clean the room. So that was the desirable behavior that we wanted. So remember, the reinforcement, no matter it's positive or negative, both will lead to increment of desirable behavior. But punishment actually reduces the unpleasant behavior. So applying an unpleasant event after the behavior, like for example, uh, uh, this is kind of positive reinforcement. Punishment is giving a punishment, application of a punishment after the response. The response will never happen again. So let's take an example. A child misbehaved in school today. After the misbehavior of the act, the child is not sent to play. So he knows that I will not be sent to play if I misbehave every time. This is a positive punishment, very similar to negative positive reinforcement. Then we move to something which is negative reinforcement. This involves taking away something pleasant after behavior occurs. So if a child fails to clean his room, her parents might tell her that she cannot go to the mall with her friends. Also, taking away a desirable activity as a desirable activity as a negative punisher on the preceding behavior. So remember, this is something which is very different from positive. Positive punishment is like positive reinforcement. Negative punishment is like removal of something that the child likes. If he or she is misbehaving today, remember, does not get the sweet to eat after the meal that he or she gets. That's removal of something which is happening in daily life. That is punishment. Remember, punishment will suppress a behavior. and reinforcement will increase the desirable behavior. There has to be the difference between the two very clear for us. So it was B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning, a Skinner box as an experiment that we had on the right. Let's move to observational conditioning, one of the most liked and I feel most popular experiments that have been done in psychology by Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura was a psychologist who introduced the concept of observational learning. Cognitive processes are learned through observing other people, copying their behavior, and this was based on a very popular Boberall experiment of Bandura, which was social learning theory, was propounded after this Boberall experiment. So, according to the social learning theory, learning occurs in social setting by observing others and its outcome. So, observational learning can happen in two ways: indirect observation and direct observation. In direct observation, you can learn behaviors by observing others, such as role models, directly, while in indirect observation, you can learn by observing or hearing others' experiences. And this is an indirect kind of observation learning. So, like you're hearing a speech of someone very mesmerized and you want to do like that. That's an indirect form. Direct is having a model in front of you, they've demonstrated an activity and an act, and you completely liked it and you felt you want to do it because the consequence was great. So that's something which is called as the direct observation. Let's understand the famous Bobodol experiment of Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura came with a concept of telling people that the most important learning with children is social learning. Children learn to imitate other people very quickly. We've seen that. A 2, 3 year old children nods when you nod them like this. So they copy you. So that's emulating their behaviors in their behavior. So copying is the first stage. Then happens imitation, which is, emulating the kind of behavior that you do by them so that it is represented well. Then we speak about social learning. Social learning happens by observing other people, making your role model, seeing their acts, and then embracing and putting it in your behavior. So that's a whole longer process than imitation. Imitation is just random copy. It's about using no stimulus response, just looking at it and copying it blindly. Now, the Bobodol experiment was an experiment conducted in phases, and the researcher Albert Bandura started this research because he felt that in the society, aggressive behavior in children were becoming increasingly common. So what he did was he used an inflated doll and he divided the groups into three different outcomes. So I'll give you an example of those three different groups and you can look at the image here. That's the Bobo doll that we have, the helium inflated balloons that you punch and they come back. So he divided the groups into three parts. The first group has two groups within it. The second B part has two groups. The 3C has two groups again. So A group, there are two children, one who are watching from the glass window and one who goes inside. So in group a set of kids, let's take an example, 5 set of kids went inside and they also they tend to hit the bobo doll, show a lot of aggressive behavior, punching it again and again, sitting on it, trying to tear it off. And there were children who were watching it from outside, from the glass door. When this A group goes out, they were praised, they were patted on the back. Then comes group B. Group B goes divided into two groups. The first group in the group B, the first part of group B, the children again hitting the bobo doll, misbehaving, sitting, trying to tear it off, and the one who was watching the glass window was watching them. But group B, the entire group B goes out. The one who were watching from the glass window saw that these children were punished. They were scolded. Now comes the last part, which is C. See the two parts of the group. The one group goes inside again, punching the bobo doll, hitting the bobo doll, etc. And at the same time, when we speak about the one which is watching it from the glass window, the children who are watching it from the glass window saw that the children are hitting, punching, assaulting the doll. Once they go out, nothing was done. So children saw from the saw from the window that the third C part group, nothing happened. They came and went out. Simple. So remember, when all the children who were in the glass window watching the A, B, and C of the glass window, when were told to go inside and enjoy with the bobo doll, which group will show the maximum aggressive behavior and which will show the least? The group A show the maximum, misbehavior, hitting the bobo doll, punching it, pushing it. Why? Because they felt that they'll also be praised like the others. So remember, researchers found that children are likely to mimic the violent behavior when they observed that the model was being rewarded or when no consequences occurred. When nothing occurred, also that confuses children to do any and everything. So children are observed, and whereas observed that the model children being punished were less violent with the Popo. So the ones who saw that the children were group B saw that children were being punished. So the glass door children went in least amount of aggressive activities. One of the very famous experiment that we have of learning, and that tells us to move from learning to memory. So did we understand how psychological cognitive processes, which is the process of thinking, functions together? You sense something, you attend to it. If you attend it properly, you'll perceive it well. That is, you give out meaning to it. If you are able to perceive it well, you will learn it. Why do we need to learn it? We need to survive. Survival of the fittest is important in our society. We will tend to learn it well, put it out, learn in different forms, which could be classical conditioning, instrumental conditioning, or with observational learning. Once you learn something, memorization is important. This is a process how we individuals function. So that is something learning that we start today again in this unit. So let's understand what is memory. What do we understand when memory comes in mind? We think about something being remembered, something being stored. Yes, that's what memory is. There are three important processes in memory. Memory is referred to as retaining information and reproducing them over time when it is required or essential. It's a very important cognitive task, which is thinking and memorizing it. It takes care of three processes within it. So memory just doesn't happen. It's not an insight. It's a process. The process comprises of three parts: encoding, storage, and retrieval. So remember, the base of memory is encoding, storage, and retrieval. So what is encoding? It is a process of converting the sensory information into a form that can be processed, processed further by the memory systems. Then we talk about something which is storage. Storage in this second stage, received information, which is received, encoded, understood, which is encoding is ideally just taking the information and making sense about it and what needs to be done with this information. Probably needs to be learned. When you learn it, you store them. You cannot use it there and then. You store it in different forms. You can store it visually, verbally, semantically, any ways that you want. Once it is stored, remember, retrieval needs to be done when it's required. So retrieval is a process of referring to, locating, and bringing the stored information in your consciousness or awareness when it is required to complete the task. One of the most important models of memory, which is called the Atkinson and Shiffrin model, which was given in 1968, proposed a model for memory known as the stage model of memory or modal model. So speaking of that, let's start. Generally, let me just explain you what this memory is with the help of the diagram that we have. The diagram is such a beautiful representation of the stage model, which was given by Atkinson and Shiffrin in 1968. So when we speak about environmental stimuli, sensory memory is a memory where all the information is taken and all the information is taken in, and also it could be visual, auditory, sense, taste, touch, smell, anything. Once the memory is not attended, let's take an example. You saw very beautiful colors, but they are of no use. You do not attend to them at all. What will happen? They'll get lost. They get flushed out of your sensory memory. But remember, this has a retention of 2500 to 2000 milliseconds. Has a very large capacity. Sensory memory also has a very large capacity. We tend to listen to people, see people, check. So many things happen in the sensory memory. But remember, only the attended part. In so much of large capacity, only the attended required part. If you attend something, that goes to something which is called the working memory. That's called the unrehearsed information. If you do not attend to it well, remember, the working memory just sends it to the, it sends it out. So that's called retention. Retention usually here goes on for 15 to 30 seconds. Capacity is 7 plus minus 2. 30 seconds is the maximum retention. Remember, in this working memory, which is the conscious memory, if you tend to rehearse what is given to you time and again, rehearse in terms of meaning, rehearse in terms of repetition, if you do it, we are putting it successfully to the long-term memory. So that is something which is called the long-term memory. Long-term memory, large capacity, large duration, stored for a number of years, infinite retention can happen from your sum and remember. If some things are not important, not rehearsed well, they're just dumped in, they will be forgotten. Forgetting takes place of information which is stored here either by retrieval failure or by decaying, which is you have not used it for a long period of time. So this was the stage model, which also mentioned that all the memory types, which was sensory memory, working memory is called the short-term memory, and the long-term memory are interconnected. They tend to lead, one leading to the other leading to the other, another. Starting from environmental stimuli, this was one of the famous model that we had. Also, remember, at the time when the advent of computers happened in society, they were connected to memory. Their working was connected to memory. So they said that the random access memory and the read-only memory, they're similar. You know, they both are very similar. So the RAM is the memory that you use while performing a task at hand, whereas ROM is the part of memory where you can save different types of files having a vast storage. So that's something that we have in terms of memory. Let's just now understand when we speak of the different types of memory. Sensory memory, short-term memory. So sensory memory is a kind of memory which is very brief. Let's understand the capacity and duration of all three to remember it nicely. Sensory memory capacity, large storage, large capacity, and storage is 20 to 2500 seconds. That's all, which is fraction of seconds that we have. Short term, very fragile. Sensory memory is very fragile. You forget things from here, like you lose things from here very fast. No forgetting things, just losing things. Short term memory is the conscious memory. Everything is here. Your functioning daily activities, conscious effort, work is here. 7 plus minus 2, it was given by Miller. He was the person who studied memory, did an experiment in it. Capacity, 7 plus minus 2, storage, 15 to 30 seconds. Again, fragile but not as fragile as sensory memory. Then we move to long-term memory. Large capacity, large storage, forgetting does not happen easily until it is stored well. Forgetting takes place from here. So this was an understanding of long-term memory, short-term memory, and SM. Stage model, but Atkinson and Shiffrin. Let's understand the levels of processing now. So this was again a model which was given by Atkinson and Shiffrin. This was a model which refutes the Atkinson-Shiffrin model. The memory consists, they mentioned, the level of processing said that memory consists of different subsystems according to them. So the LOP stated whether information will be received successfully or not depends upon the way that you process it. So better that you process it, the better that's going to be learned. So it is not depending upon the sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory, but the way you process it. So see, it's different from, they are counterposing on Atkinson-Shiffrin model being not very appropriate. So they mentioned that we have three levels of processing, which is given by Tulving and Craig, Lockhart and Tulving. 1975, they gave three levels of processing. First is called the structural physical, which is called the shallow. Then we call the intermediate level, which is the phonological, which is the sound. How does it rhyme? How does it sound to us? Then comes the semantic, which is the word meaning, adding meaning to it, understanding it, etc., which is also called the deepest level of processing. So remember, the most shallow is only understanding the spelling. You've got a new word. Let's take an example. Gazetted. You learn the spelling. Gazetted, T-T-E-D. So gazetted. Remember, you've just learned the spelling, you don't know the meaning. Next, you come to phonological. You rhyme it, gazetted, gazetted, gazetted. You speak it again and again. So when you do it, remember, this is something which is, again, intermediate. You might remember, you might not remember, but the shallow level is something that you will not know where it is used. Then comes the processing, which is meaning. Gazetted are holidays which we get, which are established and given to all. They are mandatory holidays that we have given, posted by the government. So they lead to banking holidays, every holiday. So that's the meaning. You get to know there are gazetted holidays. So remember, this is also another kind of memory theory which was given by Crick and Lockhart, stating that Atkinson-Shiffrin model does not talk about processing information well. We will rather tell you how do you process and keep the information well in your mind. So this was the levels of processing. Now coming to the last part today of the cognitive processes, which is thinking. Thinking, I feel, is it's the base of all cognitive processes. You want to memorize, you'll think. You want to learn, you will think. You want to perceive, you will think. So thinking, according to Girard in 1968, is a behavior which often is implicit and hidden, and in which symbols like ideas, concepts, and images are ordinarily employed. Gilmer in 1970 has defined thinking as a problem solving process in which we use ideas, we use symbols, laced in overt activity. Thus, thinking is a very goal directed behavior, which is true. You want to start thinking about something, reading a book, it's very goal directed. The kind of book, what is the book, what are you going to pick up and read? So thinking is very goal directed, it's base of all cognitive activities, etc. Now let's understand some of the different types of thinkings that we have. One is perceptual thinking, which is also called concrete. We have abstract and conceptual. So first concrete, conceptual, reflective, creative, critical thinking. We will not say which type of thinking is one of the most important. We need to know these are the different kind of ways that we think around. Concrete and perceptual is a form, simplest form of thinking, where we, it's carried out for perception of concrete objects, like something which is structured, something which is very contoured. You can think about it very logically. Favorite book, know what is favorite color, the food that you cook today, very concrete. So this is something which is very perceptual thinking, and something that can be imagined and has a shape, has an object that has a shape. Then we come to something which is conceptual and abstract thinking. Yes, it is little inferior from perceptual because it involves using of symbol, concepts, or language to solve a problem. Reflective is an insight-based thinking where you use your previous experiences, something that you've lived, to solve problems of today. Creative thinking is thinking out of the box. It involves a lot of alternative thinking, reimagining ideas, coming with novel solutions, etc. Critical thinking involves making reasoned judgment and examining assumptions. So it is about reasoning, judgment, and examining assumptions. So that is something which is critical thinking. Moving ahead with the last thing that we do today is the process of thinking. Remember, how do we all think? We think in two ways. Ideally, I feel someone will form mental images, someone will form concepts and propositions. So some of you might think by images, by pictures. Some of you just want words, letters, logic, thought. Some people hear what they think. Some people see what they think. So remember, two ways that people think is using your images, and some people by concepts. Concepts are categories that we form. Like animals, we quickly form categories. It could be amphibians or something which is to do with aquatic animals. Categories. When we speak about emotions, some people say there are primary emotions, some people say there are secondary emotions. Remember, some would be ones who see emotions as sad, happiness, watching them. So remember, some people think with images, some people think with concepts, which are categories. Coming to Unit 4 today that we start of Block 2, this was affective processes, which will talk about motivation and emotion. A little introduction to this. Let's understand why does motivation comes in psychology? Why general psychology needs it? We need it because it's a part of you that drives your behavior. We talked about behavior being learned and memorized. We need to know what drives us. Motivation drives us. Motivation consists of both physiological responses. It is, both psychological and physiological changes in heart rate, blood rate. Subjective, it is subjective in nature. And we need to know motivation is very complex as a word. Also, it's expressive, also internal states that gets out through the way that you emote things. So motivation and emotions are both, I think, interrelated. Emotions are feelings on action. Motivation is behavior and action. So this is how we understand. Remember, Morgan et al. Said that driving and pulling forces results in persistent behavior directed towards a goal is called motivation. We need to know needs, drives, and motives all are very different. Some are primary motivation. Primary motivations are to basic need. Secondary motivation is achieving more complex behaviors. Need, drive, and incentives all are different. Need is something which is a biological state that you need to complete. Drive is something which is perceived as a state of tension, which is an urgent need to complete it. Need is a deficiency, drive is the push, incentive is a reward. Remember, they're all a part of something that we call as motivation. One was primary motivation, basic, the other is secondary. Also know there is intrinsic motivation and extrinsic. Intrinsic is which is coming from inside. Extrinsic is coming from external rewards. People, give you incentives, money, promotions, that extrinsic. Intrinsic is your vigor to do it, your mastery to attain. Remember, this was also, there were 4 components given by Feast and Rosenberg: challenge, enjoyment, mastery, and autonomy, and determination. These are all components of internal motivation that we have, which is challenge, again, you challenging yourself to accomplish something new. Internal, again, it happens because of joy. Mastery, because you want to attain some mastery, which is high level of achievement, accomplishment. Autonomy is your sense of decision for driving a task, determined to complete it. So these are ways why we are, being intrinsically motivated. That leads to the final thing. Thank you.